Good afternoon. We will start with Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer as usual. O Sanje Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dane Chapsum Je Dagi Jinso Gibe Sunam Je Jola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sangye Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Barado Dane Chapsum Che Dagi Jinso Gibe Sunam Je Jola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sanje Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Barado Dane Chapsum Je Dagi Jinso Gibe Sunam Je Jola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Semjen Tamje Dewa Tan Dewe Judan Embra Juji Donga Da Donga Ju Judan Dawa Juji Donga Mebe Dewa Tamba Tam Mendrawa Juji Nyeren Chada Nitan Rawe Tanyon Shembola Nebra Juji. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishtas, the essence of all Buddhas of the three times who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to my glorious root gurus. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. Now think to yourself that the sufferings, the different types of sufferings that all sentient beings experience are unbearable. It's hard for sentient beings to put up with them. We can put up with a little bit of suffering for a while, but eventually it gets to us. And the suffering of our human life is slight in comparison to the suffering of all other sentient beings. And yet the suffering of being human is at times very difficult to bear, and even the good times will come to an end. And so we need to free ourselves. If we free ourselves alone, though, then everyone we love, everyone we've loved in the past, everyone we might love in the future, they'll all be left behind. So if we think about that, if you were to, just for an example, if you were to win the lottery out of some great stroke of fortune and then not share it with anyone and keep it all for yourself, you wouldn't be able to even enjoy all the money that you won, assuming that you won a jackpot. I mean, not like a scratch lottery ticket where you get $1,000, but like a real jackpot. If you get a real jackpot and you don't share it with anyone, then you're just being selfish and you can't really even enjoy it yourself. If you really want to enjoy the results, you'd share it with people. You'd enjoy it with things. And so in the same way, we need to have the motivation to share the results of our own practice with others, bring them to the state of lasting happiness, and that is the state of Buddhahood. And so think to yourself that we must achieve that state ourselves, and in order to do that, we must listen to the Dharma, contemplate it, and meditate upon it. So think to yourself that it is for this reason that we are listening to the Dharma today, and please remind yourself of the motivation of bodhicitta. The Dharma that we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma, the verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary, Youthful Play. And of the 8 chapters, we are discussing the 4th, the teachings on karma. The teaching on karma has a brief section on how, a one-line section on how karma produces all the worlds, then a section on the understanding of the karma, and then finally a section teaching the synonyms of dharmas. And then finally, and then after that, so the middle section is understanding karma, and so this is a brief presentation of karma, and then the presentation of karma according to the Great Exposition School, and finally, and then the third major section of that is a section of is the presentation of Dharma as taught in the sutras. So we're discussing the second of these, the presentation of Dharma as taught by the Great Exposition School, and within that there are three sections, the third of which is the description of imperceptible forms and so forth. So that is the part of the discussion that we are in. And where we left off yesterday, we were on the section, we were talking about this, the possession of, explaining the three types of karma together. That is the, what are we talking about? Where does that come from? There's so many points and subpoints and all this, it gets difficult to see where we are. Let's just start for today on the top of page 311. We were talking about the possession of vows, meaning when do you have vows? Now this is a kind of a technical discussion, but it's kind of useful to think about what actually do you have at each point when you're doing it. Do you have do you have the vow? Do you have an imperceptible vow? Do you have a perceptible action? What do you have when? So like when you take the pratimoksha vows, then you have like on the first instant when you're taking it, you've got both a perceptible action of taking the vow, and you've got the vow itself, the present vow. And then from the next moment onward, you also have the past vow, which is kind of a strange thing that the Great Exposition talks about. And so then we talked about the undefiled vows and how when you're in equipoise, you have all three times the past, present, and future. But when you arise from equipoise, because those two vows kind of follow your mind, when you're out of equipoise, that is when you're no longer in deep meditation, then you don't have the present, but you still have the past and you have the future. Kind of a strange thing to think about having past and future or anything, but that's what the Great Exposition does. And then when you go back into your meditation, you have those two vows. So that's the undefiled vows. And so now when we talk about the mid-vows, now the mid-vows, if you remember, are like the commitments that we make that are kind of limited in scope. They can be either virtuous or unvirtuous. They don't if they're virtuous, they don't rise to the level of an actual vow like the pratimoksha vow. But they're virtuous commitments. Or if they're unvirtuous, they're like kind of limited in scope. So they're not quite as strong as taking a vow. And so how are these possessed? If in between at first the middle, from then on one has the two times. If it's in between a vow and a wrong vow, right? We've got vows and wrong vows. Those are virtuous lifetime commitments or long commitments are vows. Virtuous long commitments, unvirtuous long commitments are wrong vows. So if it's in between, could be either virtuous or unvirtuous. It's not really either a vow or a non-vow, but there's kind of a little bit of a commitment. At first, the middle. So when you first make it, you have the middle. So the middle in between past and future means the present. And from then on, you have the two times, the past. You have the past, so you have the present and the past. So if there is the imperceptible of a mid-vow that is in between a vow and a wrong vow, in the first moment, the imperceptible of the middle time between the past and future, the present, is also possessed. So that means that in the very first moment when you make that commitment, I am going to circumambulate the stupa today. I am going to build a stupa. I am going to do whatever the commitment you're making, whether it's virtuous or unvirtuous, then at that first moment you've got the present imperceptible. And then from then on, until the mid-vow is canceled, you also have the past. So one possesses two times. So you have the past, because you've already made it, the second moment on. Like in the first moment, you're making that commitment, you've got the present. Then from the second moment, you've already made the commitment, so you've got the past and the present. Okay. As an elaboration, how those who have vows or wrong vows possess mid-vows. So it's quite possible that it's quite possible that someone who has vows might at some point have really strong afflictions that then motivate them to want to do something unvirtuous. Or that someone who has a wrong vow might make a commitment to do something really virtuous. For example, you might have fishermen. They have a wrong vow because they make their living by killing fish. And yet, they can have great faith in Buddhism and say, I'm going to participate in a life release, I'm going to do this or that. So that is what we're talking about in doing something virtuous. So that's what we're talking about here. Those with wrong vows can have the virtuous, and those with vows can have non-virtuous. So basically, if you have a wrong vow, you can do virtuous actions. And if you have vows, you can do non-virtuous actions. You have to be careful. And so you can have the impercepts as long as they are very sincere or strongly afflicted. So when those with wrong vows do something virtuous, such as a prostration out of great sincerity, they can have the virtuous mid-vow. So like at the moment they see something like a stupa or a teacher or a statue of the Buddha or whatever, and they feel faith, and they decide, I'm going to prostrate from that moment. And while they're doing the prostration, they have the virtuous mid-vow. And when those with vows do something non-virtuous, such as killing or beating someone out of the force of the afflictions, someone who has the vows, but they're an ordinary individual, and they get really annoyed, they get really angry, furious at someone, decide to kill them or beat them, then they have the non-virtuous, imperceptible vow. Now, if they then go ahead and kill the person, they lose their vows, but that's a different matter. We'll get to that. So they can have the non-virtuous mid-vows imperceptible. So they have the imperceptible form of the mid-vow from the moment, like, I've got to do this, or I have to prostrate. And they have that imperceptible as long those imperceptibles remain with them as long as they're very sincere. That is like the person with a wrong vow who decides to prostrate, who as long as they're really sincere about it, they still have that mid-vow. If they then regret it and say, no, I can't prostrate, then the mid-vow goes away. Or strongly afflicted, so that, let's say it is monastic. And I'm not going to say male or female because it could apply to either. A monastic who gets really furious at someone and decides to murder them. There's really strong affliction. Then they have that wrong vow. If at some point they realize, oh my gosh, what am I thinking? And then they start feeling faith. As that affliction dies down, then the wrong vow goes away. Okay? If they actually do it, it's even worse. Then the next question is how perceptibles are possessed. Those who are acting all possess the percept of the present time. From the first moment until cancelled, they have the past, but not the future. So those who are acting, so if you're actually doing something, you have a perceptible action, right? You have the perceptible action of the present time, and then from after the first moment, in the first moment you only have the present perceptible, from the second moment on you also have the past perceptible, but you don't have a future. You can't have a future perceptible action. You can have a future imperceptible action, but not, and this is just the craziness of the great exposition school, not craziness. There's a reason why they say this. It's because when you have an imperceptible form, such as a vow, in particular the vows that can operate in the future, such as the noble, the undefiled vows, then they restrain you in the future, right? So there's like that future vow. So that's what we're talking when we're talking about the possession of the future. There's no possession of the past, obscured or of the unobscured. And the second line here, the second line is a little bit misleading here. It should say there's no possession of the past, obscured or unobscured, perceptible, is what it's saying. You can't possess an obscured neutral or unobscured neutral perceptible action, or the past obscured neutral, unobscured neutral action, because it's just too weak. This is like, when you're brushing your teeth, yes, it's going on. You have a neutral motivation. I got to brush my teeth. It's not. I suppose you could do it out of some really sincere motivation, but it's generally a neutral action. And so that brushing your teeth, when you're done, it's like it's done, and you forget about it. It's kind of a weak thing, so you don't possess the past. perceptible. So, to read the commentary, those who abide by vows, wrong vows, or mid-vows, and are actually perceptibly acting, all possess the perceptible of body and speech at the present time. So when you're actually doing the action, you have the perceptible action, right? From the first moment until the action is canceled by the cause of cancellation. So if there's something that would cancel out your action, that might be completing the action. Then, or losing your vow, or whatever. They also have the past. So as long as if the action is one that takes multiple instants, for example, when you're doing a prostration, it takes a few instants to join your palms in 3 places and lie down on the floor and stand back up. So from the very first moment on through the second moment and so forth, then you have the present and the past, the previous moments. But there is not any possession of the future perceptible because it does not follow the mind. So it's only the vows, only the things that follow the mind that you can attain in the future, like the defiled and undefiled, the undefiled vows and the vows of dhyana. There is no possession of the past obscured or of the unobscured neutral perceptibles because they are extremely weak and are thus are unable to create past or future attainment. So just thinking about it. When you brush your teeth, does it really have any strong psychological effect on you? I hope not. Well, maybe it does. Your dentist would be happy if it did, but generally it's not. It's just you're brushing your teeth. It's something you have to do. Well, you don't have to. It's something that's good to do, so you do it. But even though it's kind of a good thing to do in terms of dentistry, it's still pretty neutral. If there are any dentists listening, excuse me for using your for making, what am I doing? I'm using toothbrushing as an example in probably the wrong way, and the dentists and dental hygienists and everyone who's listening are probably horrified. The synonyms of wrong vows, the next section on the top of page 312. Wrong vows and harmful conduct and immoral karma and its path. So in this past section, we were talking about wrong vows, and we've sort of mentioned them, and the book has sort of mentioned them, but we haven't really explained what they are yet. So here it's kind of saying, well, what are they? So wrong vows is one name, and then another name is called harmful conduct. A third is immorality. The opposite of discipline is immorality. Karma, because it's action and its path, it's the path of karma. So the body and speech are not bound, so they are wrong vows. So in other words, you haven't restrained your body and action. You haven't restrained your body and action from doing misdeeds. They are not bound from doing misdeeds, so therefore it is the opposite of a vow. So if you are, the example given in the text is a fisherman. So any such example, if you're a fisherman, your livelihood depends upon you killing. If you're a soldier, your livelihood depends upon you killing. If you are a sex worker, your livelihood depends upon you committing sexual misconduct, and so on. So you're not bound to those actions. And if you are a fraudster, then your livelihood, depends upon you lying, and so forth. So those are wrong vows. They're the opposite of a vow. Instead of binding you, they kind of push you towards the harmful actions. And they are criticized, so these, the wrong vows, are criticized by the exalted and produce an unpleasant result. So they're called harmful conduct. So the great beings say, this is wrong behavior. Now here, it's criticizing the conduct, not criticizing the person. This is an important distinction. The person isn't at fault often when they go, to some degree, whatever. At any rate, the person anyone can change if you have a wrong vow. And you can realize the error of the ways and turn onto the good path. And if you're on the good path, you can, you can go the wrong way. It goes either way. So if you're on the good path, you have to be careful. And if you have had a wrong vow in the past, you can change. It's not immutable. So this is not talking about the person. And they're the opposite of discipline, so they're immorality. On just a kind of linguistic level for anyone who's been studying Tibetan or interested in translation, in Tibetan and Sanskrit, the In Tibetan, tsultrim and chaltrim. They're kind of obviously opposite each other. Tsultrim is discipline, chaltrim is the broken discipline. But it's very common to use discipline for the term in English, although some people say ethical conduct, some people say morality. But if you just say discipline, which is kind of good and common, so I use it, but it doesn't really have a good opposite, so I use immorality. But basically what we're saying is the opposite of discipline. It's like when you're breaking discipline, when you're going against discipline, immoral, unethical, and so forth. Now, these wrong vows are karma of body and speech. So they're karma. So they're considered an action of body and speech, that imperceptible vow of body and speech. So they're karma. And when the actual taking of life is completed, they are included in the actual basis, and so for that reason, they are its karmic path. So when you are a fisherman and you are hauling the fish out of the ocean and killing them, and then at that point you're doing the actual, when the fish die, that is the actual basis. So it is the path that leads to that action, so it's a karmic path. It's not just like the aftermath of the path, which would be if someone else kills them and then you scale and gut them. So it's like the actual act of killing. So it's a karmic path. So here, there are kind of four possibilities of possessing perceptibles and imperceptibles. So we've talked about the perceptible actions, possessing perceptible actions, and possessing imperceptible actions. So how do they kind of fit together? Are there times when you have a perceptible action but not an imperceptible? Are there times you have an imperceptible but not a perceptible? When do you have both? And when do you have neither? So the reason why this is important is that if you kind of think about things and kind of engage in this type of analysis, then you can understand better what makes something. You'll understand, this is why this is perceptible but not imperceptible. This is why this is imperceptible but not perceptible. So it's like when you see these four alternatives or four possibilities of two things, and the first tendency when you're looking at them and you're coming through these Sanskrit or these Indian and Tibetan texts and they're talking about four possibilities, and you're like, four possibilities again, I don't get this. Why are we bothering to think about it? The reason to do it is that it really doesn't matter if there are four possibilities or not on the ultimate level. What's important is that you understand the natures of the objects, and by examining how do they fit together, then you can see and do it and put it together. So the four possibilities, I think we drew a Venn diagram in an earlier class. So that's when you have the two overlapping circles, right? Okay, so the first is when you have a perceptible but no imperceptible. As it's between, the mind is weak. This one who acts has just the percept. So it's between. They have the mid-vow. And at the moment, the motivation for a mid-vow, whether it's virtuous or whether it's unvirtuous, is weaker than the motivation for a vow or for a non-vow. It's a shorter, it's a smaller, it's a limited action. The motivation is lesser. So the mind is weak. This one who acts. So at the moment that you're engaging in the action, you have the perceptible, but you don't have the imperceptible anymore. You have the imperceptible kind of before, but during the action you do not. So that's the first possibility, someone who has the perceptible, but not the imperceptible. And then the second is when you have the imperceptible, but not the perceptible. When a noble's percept has been cancelled, yet it still is unborn, they have the impercept. So when you have a noble being who, for whatever reason, their perceptible vow is cancelled, such as by death, usually by death in the case of a noble being, and until a new perceptible arises, there's a period in between where they still have the imperceptible, but they don't have the perceptible. Okay? So that's the possibility of having an imperceptible, but not having a perceptible. So these are the only two alternatives that are described in the root text. The other two alternatives are not. So the first possibility, that is being a perceptible but not imperceptible, is as it, that is a mid-vow, is between a vow and a wrong vow, the mind is weak, the motivation is lesser, not as strong. I mean, it might be an even better act than taking the vow, but it's kind of limited. So thus, one who performs a virtuous or non-virtuous act has just the perceptible only. So at the moment that they're acting, this is the moment of action. That's an important point, is that it's during the action. They only have the perceptible of the action. So that's the first possibility, of having the perceptible but not having an imperceptible. The second possibility is when a noble individual's perceptible from their previous lifetime has been cancelled, yet their perceptible for this lifetime is still unborn. That noble has no perceptible, but does have the imperceptible. So this means the noble being, let's say Tashi, achieves the state of stream enterer. Achieves the state of stream enterer in this lifetime. And because they've achieved the stream enter, that they've got most 7 more lifetimes in the desire realm. They're on their way. Tashi is definitely going to achieve the state of arhatship, or whatever state. Tashi has a heart attack and dies. End of that life number 1. When Tashi dies, the perceptible action of having the vow is over, because they're dead, right? No perceptible action when you're dead. And during the bardo, and then in particular, once they link rebirth, that is, take a new body, and they're in the womb, and because it's just a stream enter, it doesn't enter the womb knowingly or anything like that. He or she, Tashi, enters the womb and is there in that phase of mushiness and then the oblong and hardening and so forth. Basically, the stages of fetal development, and it takes a while before everything coalesces. And then at some point, Tashi is going to be able to be born and then have enough presence to be able to have the perceptible action. But when it's just this little worm inside the mother's womb, there's not much perceptible going on, right? So it doesn't specify in either the auto commentary or Yashomitra which phase, at what stage the actual perceptible is arising. It just says the stages of mushiness and so forth. So those stages of the early fetal development are definitely. And so the question is then when it actually becomes, when the fetus actually becomes able to do this, and if we're not careful, there's going to be another court case over it, and someone's going to have to decide when is there possibility of perceptible action and so forth, especially if you're in America. The third possibility is such as when someone who has vow prostrates. So someone who has the vow, like someone who has 5 lay precepts. Many of you have the 5 lay precepts. So when you have the 5 lay precepts and you bow to the Buddha, to a statue of the Buddha, to the Dharma, to the Sangha, or whatever, at that time you have the perceptible virtue of the bow and the imperceptible virtue of your 5 lay precepts, right? That's having both. And then the next one. The fourth possibility is such as an ordinary individual in the formless realm. So someone in the formless realm has no body and speech, so they have no action of body and speech. They have no imperceptible vows either, because there's no form and formless, and they can't do anything anyways. So they're in the formless realm in kind of this blah state, because they're an ordinary individual, and they're going to stay there for a long time in this just neutral state, wasting time for, 80 great eons? No, 80,000 great eons? Anyways, a long time. Because the last 2 are easy to understand, they're not mentioned in the root text. So this section on the possession of the perceptibles and the imperceptibles, there's a lot of interesting things in there to think about, but I've gone through it relatively quickly because it's not something that we can actually easily put into practice. But if you take the time to look through the text and read it and think about it, there's something to understand. So those of you who are diligent may want to do that. Now, the next one, though, is Next topic, how the vows are attained, how they are attained, that is how vows, wrong vows and mid-vows are attained. This is a section that is of practical import for us. So this has 3 topics, how vows are attained, how wrong vows are attained, and how mid-vows are attained. And so the first of these is how vows are attained. How do you get a vow? This is an important question. And what is it that actually means that you have a vow? So there are 2 topics here. There are the actual and then what vows are attained in relation to. So the actual has 3 topics. The first is how the vows of dhyana are attained, how the undefiled vows are attained, and the third is how the vows of individual liberation are attained. So how the vows of dhyana are attained. The dhyana vows are gained with the level of dhyana itself. In other words, when you achieve dhyana meditation, you get the dhyana vow. Okay? As we talked about in the possession, at that moment you gain it, you have the past and the past and the present and future. So the dhyana-produced vows are gained by attaining the actual practice and the preparations of the mind at the level of dhyana itself. So it's either the actual practice, or if you achieve the preparations for the first dhyana, such as the one that we mentioned the other day, the level of not unable. So any of the 7 levels of preparation of the first dhyana, or the 4 levels of dhyana, or the special dhyana. So that would make 6 levels. So the not unable, the 4 dhyanas, and the special dhyana. The special dhyana we will leave aside for the moment. The reason why you attain them at that point is that they arise simultaneously with a mind of dhyana. As we talked about the other day, they follow the mind. When you have the mind of dhyana, that is a mind in the absorption of dhyana, then you have dhyana vows of the present, right? So that is the vow of dhyana. The actual practice is attained by, not unable is attained by training. So that means here you are, right now we're in the desire realm. We don't have the dhyana. We want to achieve dhyana. What do? We train in meditation. So you follow the instructions. You find someone who has the instructions on how to develop dhyana. They teach you the instructions, and then through those preparations, you achieve the level of not unable. So that level, that particular level of preparations. So that is a point where you gain the dhyana vow. That comes from training. Then the actual levels are produced by, the actual practice is attained by detachment. Detachment means when you become detached from the desire realm, or a subsequent level of form. So detachment means when you see that the desire of the form realm is coarse and painful, and that the form realm, you see the desire realm is coarse and painful, and you no longer have attachment to it, so you become detached from it. So when you achieve that detachment, then you achieve the first dhyana. Okay? If the first dhyana arises out of the higher second dhyana, it is attained when either the preparations or actual practice arise. So if you are going from the second dhyana back down into the first dhyana, then when you go, so because if you're on the second dhyana, you have the vow of the second dhyana, but there are times when you want to go back down to the meditation of the first dhyana, because there are certain types of contemplation that you can do on the first dhyana that you can't do on the second dhyana. So you go back down to the first dhyana, and at that point, when you go back down to the first jhana, you'd achieve the vow of the first jhana. Well, that's the dhyana vows. The undefiled vows are how the undefiled are attained. The undefiled by nobles. The undefiled vows are attained by the arising of noble levels, any one of the 6 levels of undefiled dhyana. So this means when you if you're going to achieve the path of seeing, you have to do it on one of those 6 levels of dhyana, the level of not unable, the 4 practice, or the special dhyana. And so on one of those 6 levels, you do the meditations of the path of joining that would then take you to see the 4 noble truths. And at the moment when you see the 4 noble truths is the moment when you develop the undefiled vows. Okay? So basically, the moment that you see that you see the arising of the noble levels, that means you've seen the truth, you've become either a stream enterer, or if you're already on the dhyanas, a once returned non-returnal, a non-returner. Okay? And how the vows of individual liberation are attained. These undefiled vows are something. I don't think that in our general practice we don't talk about them so much, partly because we do a different style of practice in the Tibetan tradition, but basically they come automatically when you gain realization. So it's not like you need to think to yourself, I want to take the undefiled vows. It's like, I want to achieve realization. That's what's important. And this, the undefiled vows are like, they're kind of what do we say? They're cake, you get something along the side. Okay. So how the vows of individual liberation are attained. This has two topics, general overview and specific explanations. Pratimoksha is through the perceptible of others, etc. So there are different ways that you can achieve the pratimoksha vows. The most common way that we do it is through a ceremony, and when the master then snaps their fingers, then you achieve that vow, like with the lay precepts, right? They snap their fingers and you've got the vow. So, that's a perceptible action. And then there are other ways that you can get this, that get the pratimoksha vows that we will get to in just a moment. These vows called pratimoksha, or individual liberation, are attained through the perceptible speech and prayers to the sangha of others, including abbots, masters, and so forth. In other words, the vows, when you take the vows either from the sangha, if you're taking the bhikshu or bhikshuni vows, or you take them from a master, someone who is qualified and able to give the lay precepts or the novice monk or nun vows. So that's what it means by the perceptible of others. Others means either the sangha or the master, depending upon the level of the vow. Because others can perceive that the vow has been born in one's being, so others can see. If someone, like, when you are taking the vows, the master can see you, any other bhikshus who are present can see that you're taking the vows. Sometimes the lay precepts are taken in public, and so other people who are present can see you taking the vows. If you were taking the vows with other people, they can see that you're taking the vows. So it's perceptible to others. And one can also perceive for oneself the proof that it is born within one's continuum. As Rinpoche Trungpa Rinpoche always says when he gives the vow, it's by knowing you've taken the vow that you get the vow. And the master snaps their finger and you think, I've taken the lay precepts. And you think, I know I've taken them. You can see that within yourself. The phrase etc. includes the desire to take the vow, the knowledge of attaining it, and renunciation. So these are the other factors that you need. Renunciation is important. If you don't really have, when we talk about monastic vows in particular, we talk about having a faultless and perfect vow, which is when you have the perfect renunciation, and everything is perfect, and everything is done properly, everything is to the book, which is what we always aim for doing. Sometimes something's a little bit wrong, and then it's not faultless and perfect, but you still have the vow. So, but the main thing, so the point is that if you don't really have that vow, that feeling of renunciation, that feeling that I am taking this vow because I have to achieve liberation. There's no choice. I can't stay in I can't let myself just stay in samsara any longer than I have to. Then, if you don't have that motivation, you'd still kind of get the vow, but it's better to have that motivation, to really think, the vows of individual liberation, what do you want to be liberated from? It's important to think about that. The vows of the bhikshu and the bhikshuni are attained from the sangha. The novice monk, novice nun, male and female pursuer of virtue, that is the lay precept vows, are attained from an individual, so someone such as Rinpoche or another preceptor who's giving the vows. The phrase etc. is mentioned in order to include the 10 ways the Great Exposition Vinaya says the bhikshu vows may be taken. The 10 ways the vows are taken are taught in the auto commentary. The Buddhas and self-Buddhas take bhikshu vows spontaneously. The Buddha just cut his hair. He left the palace. He snuck out in the middle of the night when everyone else had finally fallen asleep after 7 days of keeping watch. He had a little help from the gods to put everyone to sleep, and then he left. And he took his horse and his favorite horse, Chandaka, or was Chandaka the name of the charioteer? Anyways, they went, and they got to the banks of the river, and the Buddha told the charioteer and the horse to go back, and he cut his hair, and he became a bhikshu, just naturally. It's the same with self-Buddha, so that's a natural way of it. It doesn't depend upon anything else. It didn't even really depend upon the Buddha cutting his hair. He just naturally had the vows because of his merit and wisdom from 3 uncountable eons of gathering the accumulations of merit and wisdom. The 5 supports by developing certainty. So the 5 supports, also known as the good group of 5. So these are the first 5 disciples: Mahanaman, Ashvajit, Ayata Kaundinya, Bhadra, and what's the 5th one named? Anyways, I've forgotten the 5th one's name, I'm sorry. Anyways, when the Buddha came, and I'm looking at the time, and I'm trying to think. I started a little bit late, and I think I like telling stories. So, the Buddha had given up, the Bodhisattva had given up practicing austerities on the bank of the Narayana River, and so Mahanaman, Kaundinya, and all the rest said, enough of him, he's not going to go anywhere. We're going to go off and find someone else. They went off near Varanasi. There's the grove of the fallen, the groves of the fallen sages. So let's go there. So they went there. And the Buddha achieved Buddhahood and didn't teach Dharma for 49 days. And then Brahma and Indra came and supplicated him to turn the Dharma, and so he went from Bodh Gaya to Sarnath. And as he was coming down the road, the good group of 5 saw him coming. The 5 supports in the text, or the good group of 5 is another name. They saw him coming. They said, okay, remember our pact. No one is going to pay any respect to this guy, a faker, didn't do anything. And then he keeps coming along the road, and they see, wait a minute, now he's surrounded by this halo of light, 6 feet around, something's different. And they couldn't help themselves but, paying respects to him. And then he went up past, there's that stupa in Sarnath down by the intersection, the big stupa. It has the later little temple on top that was built by the Mughal emperors, one Mughal emperor. Anyways, that's where they were and where they saw him. Then he went up to where the ruins of the Dharmarajaka, near the ruins of the Dharmarajaka temple, where the old Mulagandikuti Vihara in Sarnath was. And he sat down, and they followed him, and he sat, and then he taught them the sutra of turning the wheel of the Dharma. And then he said, Kaundinya, do you understand? And Kaundinya said, yes, I see. I understand. And he realized the nature of all phenomena, all composite phenomena being impermanent, empty, selfless, and suffering. And the rest of that. And the other 4 also achieved the path of seeing right then and there. They all became arhats. And because of developing that certainty. Now this word developing certainty, in other translations it says entering the path, which is also it's not a bad way to translate it. It's actually the meaning of it that is explained. But it's like niyamavakranta in Sanskrit. So So entering like the certainty or this kind of restrictions on your behavior. It's like entering that path, entering that noble path. So that's how they became bhikshus. There was no ceremony, no one snapped their fingers, none of the other things that you have to do for a bhikshu ceremony nowadays. Because they saw the truth in the presence of the Buddha, they gained the bhikshu vows. Agyata and the others, by being summoned, bhikshu, come hither. So this is a very, very common way that this happened in the sutras. In the Vinaya, it's most often talked about in the Vinaya. So the Buddha would be someplace, and some lay person would go to see the Buddha. The Buddha would see them, and because the Buddha was omniscient, he would know, and he'd say, "Bhikshu, come hither, practice chaste conduct," and they would become bhikshus. They would put on the clothes and shave their head and become perfect bhikshus right away. So that's the third way. Mahakashyapa, by accepting the Buddha as a teacher. Okay, so Mahakashyapa was he was one of the great disciples of the Buddha. He became the first elder who preserved the teaching after the Buddha passed away and through the first council where the teachings were collected. So he was an extremely important figure for Buddhism. When he was young, he wanted to practice. This is before he knew anything about Buddhism. He wanted to follow the life of a renunciate. He didn't know how. His parents wanted him to get married. And so he said to his parents, well, if you can find me a woman she's beautiful, she must be beautiful, she must have a fair complexion, she must be kind, and so forth. And he gave a list of characteristics, which pretty much the ideal person, and how many ideal people are there? And his parents said, okay, and they sent people out looking, and they found such a girl named Sirkasamo, Bhadrakapila. Bhadrakapila and Bhadrakapila in Pali, or Bhadrakapila in Sanskrit, Sirkasamo in Tibetan. And they were betrothed. The parents arranged marriages back in that day, and so they were betrothed. And so they found out each other, and Kashyapa decided, I can't get married. I don't want her. I want to be a renunciate. And she decided, I can't get married. I don't want to. I want to go forth and be a renunciate. So they each sent each other notes, but their parents intercepted the notes and replaced them with one saying, yes, I accept your offer. And they're like, oh no. So they had to get married. But they both wanted to go forth and become renunciates, so they made a pact. We'll be celibate. We have to live in the same room because everyone thinks we're married, but we're just going to be celibate anyways. One night, they were lying next to each other on the bed, not touching, they never touched, and a snake came into the room. And Kashyapa saw it. And so he had to wake her up so that she would get away and not get bit by the snake. And after that, he didn't ever want to touch her again. So they took turns sleeping so that none would be able to touch the other. And then his parents passed away. And when they passed away, they had to take care of the house and fields. So they're going out looking at the fields, and they saw the amount of death that was caused by farming. And they realized that because they were the owners, that was their karma. And they thought to themselves, I can't do this. And so they left. They said, no, we're done. They left, they went off, and at first they went off together, but then it kind of looked still like they were kind of together. So they each went off their own separate ways. And Kashyapa, because of his power of merit, he was very strong. So he would go to some place and they'd find some statue of some deity, and he'd prostrate to the statue. And because of this power, it would break. And he did this statue after statue. Then finally he came into the presence of the Buddha, and he thought to himself, oh, it wouldn't be right if I prostrated to the Buddha and the Buddha broke in half. That wouldn't be okay. I'm not going to prostrate. And the Buddha said to him, Kashyapa, prostrate to me. I said, okay, what am I going to do? So he prostrated, and the Buddha didn't break. And he said, this is my teacher. And by saying, this is my teacher, he became a teacher. And then Bhadrakapila went off to a charnel ground where there were a bunch of 500 Jain ascetics, naked ascetics, practicing. And she was an extremely beautiful woman, and they decided, we've been practicing in order to achieve the pleasures of the God realms, and here they come. And then after that, she had to stay with him for a while, but she got away as soon as she could, and then had various other misadventures before she finally, after several years, met Kashyapa, and he asked her, how are you doing? And she said, I'm tired of being looked at like a fattened sheep. And so he brought her to the nuns, and she was ordained as a nun. She very quickly achieved the level of arhat, but she didn't achieve the level of miracles yet. And so then she was going for alms in the city of Rajgir. This is after King Bimbisara had died and Ajatashatru was king, but before Ajatashatru really got straight on his ways. She was really beautiful, and she came to the palace gates, and the king saw her and made her his wife. And she couldn't get away because she hadn't yet achieved the level of miracles. Finally, she did get away, and then she achieved the level of miracles, and it was after that point that she became one of the greatest of the Buddha's disciples in terms of seeing past lives, knowing what people had been through in their past lives. So that's the story of Kashyapa and the story of Kapila Bhadra Kapila. So Dayan, by delighting the Buddha with his response to a question. So I couldn't find the whole story on this one. Basically, the Buddha asked a question, and Sodayan gave a very good answer, and because of giving that good answer that pleased the Buddha, then Sodayan became a bhikshu. Mahaprajapati, by accepting the dharmas of respect. So at the time of the Buddha, there were no religions in India that allowed nuns. It was just not done. And the Buddha was reluctant to allow nuns because he was afraid that people would no longer respect and support the Sangha. It was because of a very sexist society. And so Mahaprajapati came and asked him twice. And he said no. And then the third time she came with 500 Shakyan women, and they made the request via Ananda, and Ananda asked, are women able to practice and achieve the result? Yes, they are. Then you should allow them to go forth. And so this third time, then on being asked the third time, then the Buddha consented, but he said that they had to practice the 8 dharmas of respect. So these are 8 additional rules. Sometimes they're translated as the heavy dharmas, sometimes as the 8 dharmas of respect. But basically, they kind of describe the relationship between the bhikshus and the bhikshunis. The bhikshunis are not allowed to criticize monks or to speak about their downfalls. They also have to pay respects to all monks and so forth. So these are rules that the Buddha made in order for the women of his time to be able to take the bhikshu vows. By accepting these, Mahaprajapati and also the other 500 Shakyan women became nuns. Dharmadina, by messengers. So Dharmadina, her father, and had a good friend who had a little boy, and then they were such good friends. The friend had a little boy, and her father, his wife was pregnant. And so they made a pact. We're such good friends, our kids should get married if she's a girl. And so she ended up being a girl. And so they were betrothed from the time before before she was born. And she naturally had great faith, and one time the Bhikshuni Utpalivarna came by their household and they talked. And she must have been, I don't know, it's not really clear, but probably 10 or 11. And they were talking, and this little girl, Dharmadina, said, I don't want to be involved in the householder life. I don't want to act upon desire, because acting on desire leads to all sorts of suffering. And the Buddha heard about this, because the Buddha is omniscient. And so the Buddha said to Ananda, tell Utpalivarna to go back and to give this girl the 5 lay precepts and the vows of going forth. And so Utpalivarna went back and gave her the vows of going forth, and she stayed that way for a while. And then a little while later, the Buddha again said to Ananda, tell Utpalivarna to go to this girl, Dhammadina, and to give her the vows of the nun in training, the 6 extra vows that you have to say. And so Utpalivarna did this, went back and gave the girl these 6 vows, and she kept them extremely strictly for 2 years. And at the end of that time, she must have been, 13, 14, something like that. And she began to transition from being a girl into being a woman. And she was very beautiful, apparently a very beautiful young girl, as it says in the history. And so her father's friend heard about this. Hey, she's old enough to get married. And everyone in the town heard about this. The king heard about it. This was in Shravasti. The king Prasenajit put up all sorts of decorations. They got ready. Got ready for a big celebration. And Dhammadina looked out the window, and she said, wow, they've put up all these pennants. Everyone's getting ready for a big celebration. What's going on? Oh, this is a great celebration. It's not a holiday, it's a real celebration, because you are getting sent off to get married. But she said, I can't do that. I can't go off and get married. And the Buddha, who knows everything and looks 3 times every day and 3 times every night to see what is happening with every single sentient being, saw. And he knew that she was ready. And so he told Ananda, tell Utpalivarna to go and to give Dhammadina the Bhikshuni vows. And so Utpalivarna went, and she saw Dhammadina, and gave Dhammadina the Bhikshuni vows. And by taking the vows, Dhammadina became an arhat immediately upon taking the vows. And then there are all sorts of miraculous displays and sounds of gods and music and so forth. And then everyone realized she's become an arhat. And at that point, her father finally consented, okay, you can go off and become a nun. She was allowed to go off and become a nun. So that's the story of Dhammadina. Where were we? People in remote lands by 5 upholders the Vinaya. So these days, the things like saying, come hither. We don't have a Buddha to say, come hither, so it's not so easy to become a bhikshu anymore. So there's a ritual. Even during the time of the Buddha, there were just so many people who wanted to become bhikshus, and not everyone could travel to where the Buddha was. So the Buddha made rituals for allowing people to become Buddhas. And so for people who are in outlying lands, then you need 5 bhikshus in order to, a sangha of 5 bhikshus in order to become a bhikshu. And people in central lands by an assembly of 10. So the people in essential lands, this means in a place where the Dharma is flourishing, where you've got enough bhikkhus around that you can have a group of 10 bhikkhus. Now, where it's not a hardship to get a group of 10 bhikkhus, and so that is the way that it's done generally. And the assembly of the good group of 60 took bhikshu vows by repeating 3 times the vow that they go for refuge. So this story was in Yashamitra, but it's very, very short. It's not very clear. At any rate, they basically just said, we go for refuge 3 times, and then they became bhikshus by doing this. So these days, it's generally through the ceremony with either 5 or 10 bhikshus. At this point, the glorious Shankya Chokten explains that the Buddha taking vows spontaneously refers to him renouncing his household and so forth, but that is an imaginary fabrication. In other words, the Buddha had the bhikshu vows, the Bhagavan had his bhikshu vows from the moment of birth. He's just naturally a bhikshu. So that is an imaginary fabrication. It is thoroughly and completely refuted in the great Kartik, the springtime cow of easy accomplishment itself. Kartik means Karmapa's tika. Tika is a Sanskrit word for a commentary, so the Karmapa's commentary that is titled the 8th Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje's commentary, the springtime cow of easy accomplishment. So I shall not beat that dead thing over again. Philosophy is one's own mind imagines and not heard of in the noble land. May delight all the fools in Tibet, but alas, can they bring true relief to all those who want liberation? So that's, I think, enough for today. I'd like to apologize for starting a little bit late. I was doing a little bit of research into stories. Not enough research. I misstudied the story about the group of 60. I missed that one. Anyways, now we should dedicate the virtue of listening to and teaching the Dharma, and think to ourselves that when we do, at the beginning, we're thinking, we're doing this for the benefit of all sentient beings. So you start out the preparation, developing the intention, is like the preparation, that's important. Then we listen, and I teach, and we try to do it as well as we can. I try to teach the Dharma as, without making anything up. And that's my job. Your job is to listen attentively and to try to gain an understanding from it. And then when we come to the end, we all have something we have to do together. We have to do the conclusion or the sort of follow through of the practice. Because if we don't, if I were to just get up off the throne and say, bye, see you tomorrow, we'd kind of lose it all. It'd just kind of disappear. So like when you do something, if you're at the end of it, and just on a psychological level, you take that last moment when you've done something, and you kind of think, I've done something good. And now, because of doing something that good, may that be of benefit for everyone. That kind of closes it, kind of psychologically. If you can sort of feel it in yourself, it's like kind of finishes it off. It's like that's one of the functions of a dedication. But the other thing is that dedication at the very end. We take this and we say, okay, we've done some good by teaching the Dharma and by listening to the Dharma, right? So we've taught and listened to the Dharma. This is a good activity that we're trying to do with the best of our intentions. Because we're ordinary individuals, we might get various other intentions in our mind at point, but in general, at some point, we might get distracted or whatever, especially if you're watching on YouTube, because I know it's really difficult to watch a boring video of someone blabbing on for an hour. It's just, it's not easy to watch a video like this, and if you're keeping up with it day after day for several weeks, that's really impressive. That's a really good thing. So if you occasionally get a little distracted, that's understandable, but in general, we're doing something good. So we take that good that we've done and we think, let's make this good be of genuine benefit for other sentient beings. And the main way we do that is through aspiration and dedication. Now, when we make an aspiration, we say, by this merit, bring all sentient beings to omniscience and free them from all suffering. That's the basic meaning of the prayer that we recite. How does that work? It's possible that through the power of interdependence, there's going to be some immediate effect, but because we're ordinary individuals, we aren't going to see that. It's more likely that it's going to actually put us and all other sentient beings in a position where we can do it together. It's like you're taking what you have and you imagine you're giving away the good that we've done. You give it away to all other sentient beings. May this be for all beings. And by giving it away to all other sentient beings, then it's no longer something that's just yours. Because it's no longer something that's just yours. If you kept it for yourself, this is my good, then later, if you got angry, it could be destroyed. You get angry and all the good in your being is just destroyed. If you get furious, you could just really counter all the good you've done. But if you've given it away, it can't be destroyed anymore, even if you get angry. It's God, it's someone else's. It's theirs now. It's for other beings. And that good will therefore be able to last until enlightenment. The example given in the sutras is like if you take a drop of water and you put it on the ground, it's going to dry up in a few moments. If you take a drop of water and put it in the ocean, it's not going to dry up until the entire ocean dries up. So by giving our merit to all other sentient beings, it's never going to dry up until all those beings become Buddhas. So we imagine that we take this and we make the intention that we're giving it to them so that they can achieve the level of Buddhahood ultimately. And in the short term, so that they may be free of all the different types of suffering that they experience. So at this point, you can, the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death, the suffering of not getting what you want, getting what you don't want, keeping what you have, just the stress of daily life, all of the different types of suffering that there are, so that they be free of all of these. And then sometimes there are times when we have particular sufferings that we can all see. In this particular time, we can see the suffering that people are experiencing because of the coronavirus pandemic, although we aren't able to see that so much anymore because we've been living through this now for 2.5 months. People have been locked down. People are bored, and you look at the news, it's like, oh yeah, there are 5.7 million people have coronavirus. It's like, it doesn't have the same emotional impact as when you heard there are 10,000 people who have it. That time it was new. It's like really, but when you say 5 million, it's just too much. We don't think about it. But each of those people is someone. They're experiencing the pain individually. And so we can dedicate this merit so that all those people who are experiencing that pain may be free of that pain of illness, may be cured and may gain good health. Will us making the aspiration now, will that actually take them off of the ventilators and make them spring up? No, unfortunately. It doesn't work that way. It happens because of karma. Yet when you have karma, they're in that position because it was their karma to be born at this time, just as it is ours. And so when we make that aspiration, sometimes things work in funny ways, and there's some connection that can be made so that maybe it'll do something. If you don't even try, nothing's going to happen. And then there are people who are suffering illnesses. I got a message about someone this morning who was just sent into a hospital and in a very critical situation. So even people like that who don't have coronavirus, it's not like other sufferings of life have gone on hold just because there is a pandemic. Death hasn't taken a break. Cancer isn't taking a break. Poverty is not taking a break. In fact, poverty is coming on with full force. All the other sufferings. And those are just the sufferings of humans. And the sufferings of animals and so forth. So we take the merit that we have done today as representative, not just of this merit, but all the merit we have ever done in the past and will ever do in the future. And all of the merit that any other sentient being ever has done or will do or is doing. And we take that all and we dedicate it all as if it were our own. And we dedicate it all so that all those beings may be free of those temporary sufferings and swiftly come to the state of happiness that is free of all suffering, the state of Buddhahood. We call it Buddhahood in Buddhism. Whatever name you want to call it, it's not so important, but achieving a state where there won't be any suffering of conditioned existence ever again. That's what we're talking about. And so, thinking in this way, let's please dedicate the merit of our teaching and listening to the Dharma this afternoon. Osanam deyedam jesipani tobnenye pedranam pamchene gyeganachi bala trobai Sibe soledro vadro vasho. By this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing and free all wanderers from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Thank you. Actually, often when we stop, I don't know if the webcast is still going on or not, but it's important. It's still going good. So when you stop, usually when we're doing things in groups, what you usually do is everyone gets up as quickly as they can. It's good to take a moment. Just sit. Let it sink in, even after the dedication. Especially when you're doing practice on your own. When you're doing practice in a Tibetan monastery, everyone is packed up and ready to get up before the dedications are finished, and it's like really hard to sort of sit and wait. But when you're on your own, you have the opportunity to sit. Chamgan Tai Sita Rinpoche recommends people to sit and just relax for a few minutes, and then to say the Vajrasattva mantra, which we can do or not do. We haven't been doing it, so we won't do it today, but think about that. The most important thing, though, is to take a few moments. This is also something that Tribun Khenpo David Karma Choephel also says, that you should take a moment after you're done. Just wait. Don't get up. Let it sink in. When you've done something good, you let it sink in so that it stays there. If you get up, it's like there's no time for it to kind of settle into your being, so you take that time to sit and let it do that. And just let your mind relax, really, I guess is the most important thing when this is happening. This is why I take my glasses off after everything is done. So you all have a moment to sit and just relax while I put on my glasses. And now I can see the camera that I'm speaking to. All right, thank you very much.